topic of karma is so fascinating. Last night I looked up jokes about karma because there's always jokes about karma. Usually they're about parking. And people really confuse karma with luck often, but nonetheless. There were whole websites literally attributed to jokes about karma. But I just wrote a couple of them so we could giggle a little bit, not long jokes. But it says, it's called karma and it's pronounced ha ha ha. And then another one said, karma never loses an address. Really true, actually. I had the great pleasure last night of being inspired to reread the chapter from Autobiography of a Yogi called Outwitting the Stars, which is really all about karma. And I'll come back to that in a little bit, but it was one of those experiences that I've talked about, everybody talks about it, where I realized that I never really read that chapter before. You know, where something's just revealed to you suddenly. And I said to myself, did I even understand this was all about karma? I'm really not sure, but it's such a beautiful chapter. Please go back and read it if you can. But I thought I would start by telling just a couple of stories because they're so telling. I think we all think about karma that we understand the first part of what karma is all about. That is, if we do good deeds, whatever they are, then eventually that goodness will come back to us in this life or in another life. And if we do bad deeds, if we behave badly, that too will come back to us. And that's true. And often we're left bewildered in this life. I've been around a lot of people who are suffering greatly and saying, what did I do? And it's probably an irrelevant question because it hardly matters what caused the karma. Much more important that we meet it head on, but nonetheless, people really get with suffering that something's coming back to them that they can't quite mentally grasp. And as I said earlier when I decided to look for jokes about karma, it's just so misunderstood often as either luck or good things come and they're misused sometimes. So it's hard to say what's good karma, what's bad karma. If somebody wins the lottery and they give that money to many, many people in need, or they do good deeds with the money, that's good karma. If they win the lottery, same amount of money, but they buy weapons and hurt people or do other really dark things with the money, suddenly that same money becomes bad karma. So it's complicated when we try and figure it out intellectually. Nonetheless, karma is really in play and guiding all of our lives. I remember when Swamiji asked Master, you're saying every wish, everything we do needs to be fulfilled. Is that even true about a desire for an ice cream cone? And very seriously, Master said, absolutely. Whatever wish you have, whatever desire you have, whatever deeds you've done, it will all come back to you. But the second part of the notion of karma is very seldom talked about, and that is that within every seed of karma, lies the possibility for freedom, lies the possibility for moksha. That is always true, whether we understand it or not. Our lives are being driven by karma that we've accumulated, and we always have the ability to turn that into soul freedom. It doesn't always look that way because karma can be very difficult, but I'd like to tell a couple of stories, then we'll come back to that chapter of Autobiography of a Yogi. These are all stories from either the Mahabharata or the Ramayana, which are just filled, every story in both of those great epic works holds tremendous spiritual teachings for us. But there was a couple, and this is from the Mahabharata, who desperately wanted to have a child, and they were trying to have a child for a very long time. And a great saint came to them and said, I'll give you a child. You will have a child, but you can make a choice. You can either have a child that will not behave well, but that will live for a very, very long time, but cause a lot of trouble, or you can have a child that will come in and will only be able to live for a few years, and then he will have to leave, but he will bring light and the God realization into this life. And the couple thought about it for a while and made the right decision. They said, we would rather have a child that would bring light into the world. So this child was born, and the child's name was Markandeya. And he was destined to die at age 16. And he brought a lot of light into the world. But just as he was about to turn 16, he wrapped himself, he clung to the linga of Shiva. He grabbed onto Shiva. And the god of death comes, Yama, tries to lasso him, tries to kill him. And Shiva himself comes out and says, how dare you? Would you kill me? Because Markandeya is holding on to Shiva. And at that moment, Yama realizes his mistake, and Markandeya is granted immortality. So in and of itself, it's a beautiful story that says, although his karma said he was going to need to leave at age 16, by the very act of not just calling on God, but of clinging to God with all of his strength, he was in fact granted immortality. So that's the beginning of a story. I'm going to parenthetically say, when we were in India, I would very often ask Sai Ganesh a question about a figure or something. He would start answering me, and I would be engrossed. And then a character would come up. Then he'd have to explain that character. Then he'd have to explain. And very often, at the end of all of these beautiful stories, I never got my answer to the first question. But yesterday, as I was reviewing some of these stories, I thought, now I feel much more both empathic and sympathetic for what was being demanded of Sai Ganesh, because it's impossible. This is just how Indian stories are. The characters represent so much, and they're involved in so many different areas that you can't get directly from here to there. Anyway, here's Markandeya. He's now a very great soul. And we all know that there were 5 Pandava brothers. The oldest brother is Yudhishthira, and he somehow misbehaved often in his life. That was his karma. And at some point, when the brothers were in the forest, because I'm not going to get sidetracked here, but the brothers had to go to the forest. These are the good guys in the Bhagavad Gita. These are all of the qualities that represent God. Yudhishthira is the oldest, but he just somehow couldn't do the right thing. And he realized that, and many of us know, that part of how they got into the forest, is that he got involved in games of dice. And suffice it to say, he lost everything. He had a habit of gambling. That was one of his downfalls. So there they are in the forest, and he's aware that this huge debacle is about to unfold, and he's feeling very responsible. So he's talking to every self-realized or almost self-realized person that comes along how can I get out of this? How can I get out of it? How can I undo all of the harm that I've done? Because, and this is where it's important for us, he had done a lot of harm. He had lost a lot of what the brothers needed. He had just gambled it away, very much like we all do from life to life in various ways. And it says in our festival, even when repeatedly we lost everything we had, we still don't learn our lessons. But he was asking, so along comes Markandeya, this great saint who is granted immortality, and he said to him, how can I possibly undo the harm I've done? He said, I always want to be doing good, and it looks good in the moment. I think it's going to be the right thing, but I'm constantly getting confused and constantly making mistakes. And Markandeya says to him, just by virtue of the fact that you've asked means that you care a lot and much of your karma will be dissipated. The story goes on, and obviously he's one of the good guys, and I don't think our own Yudhisthira would have taken that name if in fact he didn't rise above his karma, and he does, and the rest of the story will be told over and over probably at other times. But once again we see that just by virtue of reaching for God, we can dispel and dissipate so much karma, and that power that God gives us, really the God-given power to make conscious choices, to use our will in a way that takes us towards the light, is what's important. So no matter how bad the things are that somebody has done in past lives, they don't have to go through every bit of karma piece by piece, but rather they need to keep their sight on the light. Swamiji talks a lot about this himself. He says, just imagine if we had to go through every single bit of karma that we've created. Remember, Master told us we don't remember our past lives because we couldn't bear to live with what we've done, all of us. But in a moment, with the right action, which always has to do with moving towards God, all of this can be dispelled. One more story, and then I'll come back to the chapter in the autobiography, because these stories we remember, and these stories give us hope. And this is a story from the Ramayana that I know many of us at least have heard before. But there was a young boy who was born into the family of a great sage. So he came in with what looked like very good karma. One day he went for a walk in the forest and he got lost. And he was never found by his family. But he was adopted by a family in the woods. And the man who lived in the woods and had made a home for his family in the woods was a hunter. So he taught this young boy to hunt as a way of making a living. And the boy did, and he grew into a man, and he hunted, but he also stole from everybody who came into the forest. He managed to take things from them that were not rightfully his. And one day, a pilgrim comes walking down the road, and he stops him, the hunter boy, man, and says, I want everything you have. And this other man says, I'll give you everything I have. No problem for me to give away all of these things. But I ask you to stop and ask yourself, why do you do this to people? And have you considered the consequences? And so this young boy, whose name was Ratnakar, which means evil, that was his name. He was very bad. He was stealing all the time. But when this man said to him think about it. Think about the consequences. Think about the karma that you're accruing. And ask yourself, is it worth it? And he said, of course it's worth it. It's how I support my family. I have to do this. It's how I give to my friends. And he said, well, would your friends and your family be willing to accept part of this karma for you, the bad karma that you're accruing? And he said, oh, absolutely. They love what I give them. I'm sure they would be there with me. And so this man says, why don't you go and ask them? And so the hunter goes to his friends and say, look, some of how I'm giving you what I'm giving you, I get by stealing. Are you going to be willing to accept some of the karma for that? And they said, absolutely not. We love what you give us, but we're not going to take any responsibility for it. It's what you do. And this man was really surprised. So he moves on and he goes to his family. And he says to his family, much of what I bring home I've stolen. Will you be willing to help accept some of the bad karma? And they said, no, it's your job to support us, but we didn't ask you to steal and to do this. So he goes back to the man in the woods who had said to him, by the way, you go and you ask these questions. I'll wait for you. And of course, that person turns out to be Narada, a great sage. And just like God says for us, with all that we do when we're accruing bad karma or misbehaving, I'll wait for you. You go, you ask. So he comes back to Narada, and he's very upset. And he says, they're not willing to accept my karma. And Rama says, just like that. And then he says, what can I do? And Narada says, it's going to be very easy. What you need to do is you need to sit down and you need to keep saying the name of God, Rama, Rama, Rama. Just keep saying it. Just keep calling to God. And the man tries, but he can't. He can't form the words even. He's been so bad, he can't say God's name. But Narada's there with all the goodness and grace of God. And he says, I'll tell you what, why don't you say Mara, Mara, Mara? Just say it repeatedly over and over, which means evil. It means a form of evil. That was easy for this man to say. But of course, Mara became Rama the more he repeated it. And he just kept repeating it and repeating it. And the story says that he stayed there for so long that ants kept coming and they formed an anthill around him that covered him and obscured him from the vision of everyone that passed, except Narada came back. And Narada cleared away the anthill and renamed him Valmiki, which means anthill, and the Ramayana came through him. All of these, I read many more, let me just say that. But all of these beautiful stories that keep saying to us, it's not what we've done, it's who we are in this moment. And within each of us lies the power to transform, to transmute. As Viveka Devi said so beautifully in a couple of sentences in the fire ceremony today, in a moment, that karma can be transmuted, it can be transformed, if we but ask God. I seek purification by the grace of God. When Sri Yukteswar comes to Master at the beginning of this chapter, I have my glasses, he says, I want you to wear a bangle. And Master says to Sri Yukteswar, I don't want to wear a bangle. I don't believe in astrology. He says to Sri Yukteswar, I don't believe in it. And Sri Yukteswar says to him, in essence, this is not a question of belief. This is what is. This is truth, that in all of our past lives, which he weaves in this chapter into all of astrology, which he says right away, most men will not understand, so we don't have to try and understand it right now. Sri Yukteswar said that. But in essence, every time he uses the words planets, he says these are tendencies from the past. That's what he's saying to Master. And he says there are many, many ways to move beyond our karma. And he talks about prayer, and he talks about doing good deeds. But he also says wearing a bangle, which is made of a certain amount of these precious metals, or wearing certain stones, have the ability to dissipate karma. And he says it very clearly, but he goes on in this chapter, and he winds up saying these beautiful words, because he's saying God's power transcends all of the power. It's bigger than all of the power that we have brought with us karmically. That if we can just realize God's power within, or invite God's love and light into our life, that in moments we can just dissipate, burn up all of this karma. There's a wonderful story from the AY. I'll come back to this chapter, but where Master's told he has an astrological reading done, which is what turned him against astrology, by the way. And on that astrological reading, he was told that he would marry 3 times, and twice that his wives would die, but he would then marry a 3rd time. And he just kept saying, I'm not marrying, I'm not marrying. He said then in a flash, he had an inspiration, and he wrote these words on a piece of paper, that seeds of past karma cannot germinate if they are roasted in the divine fire of wisdom. Seeds of past karma cannot germinate. So his karma, his brother, his family were saying is you have to marry 3 times. But he said it came as an inspiration. They cannot germinate in a fire of divine wisdom. And he took that paper and he burned it like we do. And he put all of the ashes in a bag, and he wrote those words on it, and he left it for his older brother, Ananta, who laughed at him and said, you cannot, this is truth. You can't come up against truth. But Yogananda knew better, and in fact, as we all know, he didn't marry. Somehow he wheedled his way out of the first 2 marriages, and the 3rd wife that was there for him, he actually gave to a cousin who's very happily married, was very happily married to that great woman. He never married because he understood that the fire of divine wisdom, that the fire of divine love is greater than any karma that we have. And what Sri Yukteswar said to him eventually is all karma can be dissipated if you can turn your attention away from the creation back to the Creator. That is such a beautiful line. Turn your attention away from the creation, which is duality, which is what we live in, which is everything that's helping us create more karma, and turn it to the Creator. Just such beautiful lines that keep coming through this chapter. Ultimately, he said to him, the deeper the self-realization of a man, the more influences the whole universe by his subtle spiritual, the more he influences the whole universe by his subtle vibrations, and the less he himself is affected by phenomenal flux. I mean, there is the promise. The more self-realized anyone, the less vulnerable we are to all of what's going on that's trying to create this karma in us. and the more ability we have to just rid ourselves of all past karma. This is why that phrase that Maria Warner said as she was dying to her husband, Devarshi, who we all know, who was having a hard time with her death. And as they were walking in for her to have her MRI, this is the essence of really going above and beyond karma in a phrase. And as Jyotish said, he wrote a beautiful blog on karma many years ago. It was soon after Maria died, so like 2011 or something, and it was published in a paper that used to be published but through the village that I don't think is anymore. But nonetheless, Jyotish wrote such a great piece on karma. But in that, he quoted Maria, who said to Devarshi, detach yourself, because she could see that he was upset. He was attached to their relationship, karma that was not going to serve him. Control the reactive process. Not easy to do, but such extraordinary advice. And then she said, live the teachings. And if we could all live by that, detach yourself, control the reactive process, live the teachings, just such pure wisdom. Jyotish wrote in his blog, many of us have this on a wall or on our computer, even what would come up on the computer screen, to remind us to move beyond that which is pulling us, to not spend so much time in the creation, but to focus more on the Creator. Most of all, for each one of us to remember everything that comes to us in ours. What Sri Yukteswar said, what Jyotish repeated, is that the first thing that people do when things come to us that are difficult is we try and blame somebody else. It's a real downfall of humanity. And if we can accept what comes, doesn't even matter if somebody else is misbehaving. Doesn't even matter. Sri Yukteswar said, if you're driving along and you're paying attention to all of the laws of the road and somebody comes and hits you who is breaking all the laws, he said, don't try and figure out what they did that's wrong. Ask yourself, why was I here at this time? What was I doing? Just in a situation where you would never even think it was wrong to blame somebody else. So we have to be willing to look at what comes our way, no matter how challenging it is, and hold it up as the perfect gift from God. As within that act, whatever it is, that seed of karma lies all of the possibility for freedom. Whatever it is, imagine that and just hold on to that thought every time you go to feel terrible about what's happening in your life, or you want to complain about somebody or blame somebody or just feel sorry for yourself. No, that is not how we dissipate karma. That is precisely how we create more lifetimes. The only way through it is to see it as the perfect gift at the perfect time in your life. Not easy, but the whole of the spiritual path.
Where has my love gone? Long are the nights, now that she's left me, dimmed my delights. Where is my love friend? Passed she this way? Saw you her smile? Oh, what did she say? Passed she here, my sweetheart, passed she here. Sweet was her promise when first we met. Whispers of heaven made me forget heartaches and labors, that searing pain. Rest now, she said, you found love again. Ah, past she here, my sweetheart past she here. Surely she lied not, heaven did shine, piercing the darkness, love then was mine. Could she not linger, must even she rise and depart like mist on the sea? Ah, past she here, my sweetheart past she here. Lives made of dreams, friend, dreams that must break, quickly dispersing when we awake. Strains that when love calls, memory stays, crying across the tides of our days. Ah, past she here, my sweetheart past she here. There by my bed she left me a note. Can you explain these words that she wrote? Seek me, she said, love out on the sea. Boundless the reaches of true love must be. Ah, past she here, my sweetheart past she here.